Hello, welcome my friends. Kevin Shirky here, the Indiana Jones nerd yet again. And today we're talking about references in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. There are plenty of little Easter eggs and references for devoted fans that you wouldn't catch unless you were a big Indiana Jones fan. Yes, some of them are pretty obvious, pretty in your face, but there are some which are very obscure, very deep cut. So today we're going to go over all of the references that have been found so far. So obviously, the opening scene, Raiders of the Lost Ark, you all know about that. One little caveat is that Indy grabs his hat rather than the whip, which is more of a Temple of Doom reference. But yeah, you guys all know about the Raiders of the Lost Ark opening scene. But what you might not have realized is a hidden little Easter egg. If you go to Forrestal's camp, you'll find a book by Maria Smirnova, and this is a character from the French Indiana Jones comic books from the early 90s, which are very rare, very obscure reference to make here. And this character actually is mentioned twice in this game because there's a note in Giza as well, which we see that Voss has contacted this Maria and is asking her to write a fluff piece about himself, and she said, I'm not going to do that, I don't even do that for Indiana Jones. And Indy mentions that he hasn't seen her since the incident with the volcano, which is a reference to the third of those three comics, which is called The Cursed Grimoire, is the English translation of that. So that's quite a deep cut, that character. Now, Indy wakes up, and we see Marcus Brody talking in his sleep, and he's saying, oh, it's so big, it's like a maze. This is obviously a reference to a funny line from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Indy says that Marcus got lost in his own museum. Now, shortly after that, you will find a map of Marshall College, and you might realize that three of the other professors listed on the college map there are actually from the Raiders source book from the 1994 World of Indiana Jones tabletop RPG. The source book did mention these three teachers' names, Keeler, Bedini, and Komarov. So another very deep cut reference. Now, as you're walking around the college, you might see flyers for a dance, and you'll notice at the bottom that Willie Scott is providing the music, or at least her music is being played at the dance. So that's a nice little reference to that character. We don't often get Temple of Doom referenced in other works, and there are a couple of Temple of Doom references in this game, which is great. Now, back at Indy's office, there is the map of the Temple of the Forbidden Eye. And this is really cool to see because, once again, this is a adventure that is not often referenced in other Indiana Jones work. So really cool to see. This map was from Chuck Ballou, who was a Imagineer and artist behind all of the artwork on Temple of the Forbidden Eye. So once again, really cool to see that in here. That story takes place in 1937 as well, so that's a good choice to have it here. Now, back at Indy's classroom, you'll find a note which mentions a scroll and a Dr. Lawrence and Uppsala, Sweden. These are references to a comic which took place in 1930. This was Indiana Jones Adventures #1. Came out in 2009, I believe. And a wonderful little series that only lasted 2 issues, unfortunately. But what's interesting is that part of the story takes place in Uppsala, Sweden, which is where Machine Games is doing their work. Machine Games, of course, are the developers of this game, and they are headquartered in Uppsala, Sweden. Now, Marion Ravenwood. Tons of references to Marion throughout the game, obviously. And, you know, we hear her voice, we hear Karen Allen's voice in the opening scene of the game, and then Marion gives Indy the journal, and you know, much of Indy's kind of emotional journey in this game is dealing with his breakup with Marion. So plenty of references to her, obviously, and we'll have more on that a little later. But let's move on here to some young Indiana Jones references. So first of all, in Indy's office, you'll see a rhythm and blues gramophone record, which he later gives to his friend Antonio. Now, this is definitely a reference to Mystery of the Blues, a great young Indiana Jones episode. The only one which featured Harrison Ford, by the way. So most Indiana Jones fans know about this episode, and it established his love of blues and jazz. And speaking of Antonio, who's the person that he gives this gift to, Antonio meets Indy in the Vatican and calls him Henri, which is the name that Indy used to sign up for the Belgium army. The fake name of Henri de France is what he used. And Indy responds to this by saying, I haven't heard that name in 19 years since the infirmary by the Piave. That's the Piave River, placing it in northern Italy, which is obviously a reference to another young Indiana Jones episode, Tales of Innocence, or Northern Italy, June 1918, when he worked in an infirmary and met Ernest Hemingway for the first time. Now, also in the Vatican, you'll find that Henry Jones Sr., Indy's father, has been spied on, in addition to Indy himself, by the Vatican. After Indy goes after the Siwa cat mummy, the Vatican send their people out, and there's a note basically concerning Henry Jones Sr.'s quest for the Grail, his research into the Grail, and they determine ultimately that it is not related to the Great Circle, so they're not interested. There's another great reference to several Indiana Jones characters, also in the Vatican. Near the very end of the Vatican section, when you're in one of the treasure rooms, there's a little note which mentions an expedition by Andres Uribe, which Indiana Jones and Rene Belloc took part in. So the story is that Indy found a stone tablet relating to the Great Circle, so that's what got the attention of the Vatican. But at the same time, Rene Belloc stole several pieces which were found at this expedition, which tarnished the name of the lead person of the expedition, which was Andres Uribe. Now, Andres Uribe, his name became tarnished. He also believed that Indiana Jones had stolen some credit from him. So as a result, his dying wish was to tell his children, get revenge on Indiana Jones. So just a few months after the events of this video game, there's a comic book called Indiana Jones and the Arms of Gold, in which his children basically are trying to get revenge against Indiana Jones. So let's go to Giza, and there are tons of references to Salah here. Little disappointed that we didn't get to see Salah himself in this game, but he can't always show up. So when you get there, there's a scene where a person is playing a oud, and Indy says, almost as good as Salah's uncle. And also there's a mention when Indy finds the caves that Salah would have lost his mind if he saw this. And there was one other one in there, I think it was in the village, there was another Salah reference as well. Speaking of Salah and Raiders of the Lost Ark, both of the disguises that you wear in Egypt are from Raiders of the Lost Ark, or look identical to them. First of all, the Tanis dig site disguise Indy wears is playable here, and so is the Wehrmacht uniform as well. Another Indiana Jones story which is referenced here is the novel Secret of the Sphinx, as you'll find a note which mentions the Omega book, and Indy mentions Sokai character from that book as well. Meanwhile, back in the village, you will find a character selling fine leather jackets, and this is a great reference for anyone who loved the old Lucasarts point-and-click adventures. Starting with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, they would often have this line in their games, not even just in Indiana Jones games, but in some of the other games as well. They would have someone selling fine leather jackets. It just became a running gag. So that was a great little reference there and treat for longtime fans. You will also be buying a lighter from the village, And this lighter, of course, looks identical to the one that Marion used in Raiders of the Lost Ark. As far as we know, it is not the same lighter. Technically, it is possible that Marion loses her lighter when she gets kidnapped in Egypt, and somehow it falls into the hands of this vendor, but I think the assumption is this is not the same lighter, this is just another lighter, but it happens to be the same model. Now, a little bit later in the Egypt section of the game, Voss meets Indy for the first time. They have their first face-to-face meetup. Voss is trying to get into Indy's head and mentions his breakup with Marion, saying that you didn't want to be a father, you didn't want to be your own father. So that's a tiny little reference to Henry Sr. as well, and possibly also, from the player's perspective, a reference to Mutt, because as we all know, Marion was pregnant at this time with Mutt Williams, even though Indy didn't know that at the time. And shortly thereafter, there's a scene with Indy and Nawal encountering a snake, and Indy mentions that he's more of a dog person, obviously a reference to Indiana the dog, the beloved canine companion seen briefly in Last Crusade and the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. And of course, Indiana himself was named after this dog. And Indiana, in fact, was also named after the real-life Indiana, the dog of George Lucas. And there's another maybe related reference. Back in the Vatican, there's an NPC having a conversation about naming their dog after famous people that she likes. So that may have been a deliberate reference there as well. As we continue our list here, let me remind you that you can now secure your copy of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle cheaper than anywhere else through Instant Gaming. This is a great website that is offering the game at 20% off for Steam, for Xbox. They have the premium version, they have the regular version as well, and they have a bunch of classic Indiana Jones games too. You can get Infernal Machine or Fate of Atlantis for less than $1.50. They also have the Lego Indiana Jones games really cheap, so definitely a great place to buy discounted video games, Instant Gaming. Alright, and skipping ahead now to Shanghai, when you get in the airplane chase, if you shoot your own rudder, I'm sure you guys all noticed this, Indy will say, "They got us," which is a reference to Last Crusade when the situation is reversed, and that time it's Henry saying it to his son. That's a great reference. And another phenomenal reference, just a few moments later, Indy flies through Club Obi-Wan, the iconic opening scene location from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and you get to see the stage and the gong and the signage outside. It's great. Maybe the best reference in the game. I think everybody really got a smile out of this particular moment. So really happy to see that, and there's a brief little conversation about Lao She won't be happy about all of this. So that was great to see. And now at some point during the game, Indy does say, "That wasn't so bad, was it?" Which is another Temple of Doom line referenced. I don't remember exactly where he said that, but maybe you guys can remind me. But yeah, he definitely said that at some point in the game. There's a reference to Hamlet. That's not Indiana Jones related, obviously, but just kind of surprising and interesting. And finally, we have Indy being fired from Marshall College. This is not really a reference, but just something, I guess, to talk about. In the original film, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy was teaching at Marshall College, and then in Last Crusade, it's 2 years later, he's now at Barnett College, even though the interiors are the same, but the exteriors are different. So this has always been kind of confusing. Are these the same colleges? Are these different? What's going on with this exactly? So now, Lucasfilm basically is settling this. So Indy works at Marshall College until 1937, and then he gets fired for chasing after the Great Circle. And then for 2 years, he goes and works in Barnett College before he returns, of course, to Marshall College, where he is in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Alright, so that is all of the references related to Indiana Jones in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle that I know of as of this moment. So definitely let me know down in the comments. Are there any other references that you guys have picked up on? Thank you guys so much as always, and I wish you all fortune and glory. Bye-bye now.
Play it day one with Game Pass.